What's up, Internet? This is Rambling Josh, and today I've got basically a giant series of tangents that I want to talk about. But in the end of the day, it all kind of pertains to the topic of jumping. However, loosely it may relate. But, anyways, so this whole kind of train of thought originated a while ago when I was thinking about a game that I talked about in the first of these things that I did. I talked about a game by the name of Smite. Smite is a third-person MOBA game. And a MOBA game is a Defense of the Ancients or League of Legends style game. If you don't know what that is, basically, it's kind of like a quasi-RTS style game that's like adapted so that you only control a hero character rather than an entire army, and it's usually it's in like a team fight type thing where you usually have 5 allies against 5 enemies, each person controlling their own hero. You have to kind of use your hero to take out the other team's base, and it's kind of broken down into part of it is kind of influencing the map so that like each side has creeps or minions or whatever you want to call them that's constantly streaming towards the other side's base, and they'll all kind of like clash with each other. And part of the MOBA game is just like influencing those fights so that you can kind of push towards the enemy base. And the other part is just fighting with the enemy heroes. And none of that has anything to do with my topic at hand whatsoever, but, whatever. So, a big part of the MOBA game is escaping. And, well, let me start over. When I was kind of contemplating what exactly a third-person MOBA game would be like, escaping is something that came to mind. See, normally in a MOBA game, because it's like a RTS-ish style thing, like it's based off of RTS engines usually. Like, well, maybe not so much, but like the original Defense of the Ancients was built in the Warcraft 3 engine. It was a Warcraft 3 mod. And so you have this like pulled out overhead view. You even have the ability to like click around on the minimap and see what's going on in other places and stuff. And you don't have any of that in a third-person MOBA game. But one of the things that came to mind was escaping, because escaping is a big part of MOBAs because it's fairly important. Being able to know when to kind of pull out and when to run away is fairly important, because when you die, not only is it negatively affecting your hero and by extension your team, because you're taken out of the fight for a while, but it's also benefiting the other team directly, because if they kill you, they get money, and that lets them buy better equipment and stuff. So it's kind of a big deal. So preventing yourself from dying is important. Now, a big part of escaping is typically firing off your abilities kind of behind your back. Like you might be like running away back towards your base, and the enemy heroes might be chasing you, and so a lot of times you'll be trying to like hit your pursuers with a stun or a slow or something that kind of improves your chances of getting away from them. But how do you do that in a third-person game? Because like you're not looking behind you. If you're running away, you're looking in the other direction. Now, the most obvious way to do it would probably be to have like some sort of key that you can hold down that reverses the camera for a while or something, so that you can like fire behind you and keep walking forward. But that's neither here nor there. The first thing that came to my mind when I started thinking about this was World of Warcraft. World of Warcraft is kind of a third person. So in World of Warcraft, if I want to run in a specific direction and fire off an ability at a target that's behind me, what I typically do is I run the direction I want to go, and then I jump, and that gives me like forward momentum so that while I'm jumping, while I'm in the air, I'm like indefinitely moving forward at the same speed as if I was running in the direction that I want to be going. And then when I'm in the air, I drag the mouse around. I right click and drag the mouse so that I turn my character around to face backwards in midair. I fire off my ability, so the ability goes off, and I turn whip the mouse around again so that I'm facing forward again. So by the time I'm landed on the ground, I'm facing the way that I want to be running again. And so I just kind of keep running and never lose any momentum, and whatever ability is fired off behind me, everything is just dandy. And that whole thing kind of got me thinking about like how jumping in particular works in World of Warcraft, because it's kind of an odd thing. Because 3D games in general, when it comes to jumping, is a bit of an odd thing, at least in my mind, at least when I was thinking of this. So it kind of all originates from... I was thinking of this kind of cool stuff you can do with jumping in World of Warcraft, but also around the same time, I started playing a game by the name of Beyond Good and Evil, namely the HD remake on the PlayStation 3. And one of the very first things I noticed about that game is that you can't jump. And that struck me as very strange. It felt very odd to have this kind of big, kind of open action adventure-y style game where you can't jump. And upon kind of thinking about it, it kind of struck me like, why is that strange? There's a lot of 3D games that don't have jumping. I mean, a lot of action games like, God of War and, I don't know, Metal Gear Solid or whatever, they don't have jumping, so why does it feel so strange that jumping is lacking? I mean, upon playing the game for a while longer, I mean, it never felt like it was something that needed to be there. It's Beyond Good and Evil as actually feels very much like a Zelda game in that respect. It's like it plays out very similarly in that when you need to jump, if you just like run at the edge that you want to jump off of, you jump automatically and stuff like that. There's just no jump button. So it kind of got me thinking, like, what merits really are there to the ability to jump in a 3D game like this? And that kind of brings me back to World of Warcraft again, because that tends to kind of be my reference point for a lot of things. So, I mean, in World of Warcraft, obviously, I explained earlier how we have this thing where you can, like, jump and twist yourself around and stuff. And they have implemented some cool things in the past where you can, like, use jumping in clever ways in boss battles and stuff like that. But the other thing I want to mention is there's some pretty cool platforming stuff that they do from time to time. Like in the Molten Front dailies that they added in patch 4.2. There's this one kind of nifty part where you have to jump from like rock to rock that's like floating in the air, and you do that to get from kind of the main island to like a little smaller island. It's kind of obnoxious when you like fall off and stuff, but the whole thing is I thought was kind of neat. And you have some nifty platforming stuff in like Dungeons and Dragons Online, apparently. But at the same time, like, jumping actually causes a lot of problems in World of Warcraft. I mean, in pretty much any 3D game with jumping in general, there's almost always some sort of problem that arises from like the players finding a way to access an area that they shouldn't be able to get to, or getting themselves stuck in terrain or something like that. And that wouldn't be there if you couldn't jump. And in particular in World of Warcraft, one of the things that I've personally been working to try and kind of improve on is the way it kind of pertains to the way that the server reads your jumping. I'm not sure exactly 100% how it works, but basically there's this like disconnect between, like when you jump, there's this disconnect between when you are in a specific spot and when the server thinks you're in that spot. So say there's like a patch of fire, and you're in the patch of fire, and you're like in the process of moving out of the fire, but you jump. I mean, that's a pretty natural reaction. Like, oh God, I'm in the fire, let's jump out of it. That feels like it's getting you out of the fire faster, even though it's actually not. But the problem is, until you actually hit the ground, the server doesn't register you as being out of the fire, even if partway through your jump you leave the fire. So you're technically considered, on fire for slightly longer than you actually are, or you actually should be. So that's something I've personally been trying to improve on is, knowing when to jump and when not to jump. Because jumping can actually be detrimental. And I mean, that's kind of a bad thing. And it kind of gets me thinking, like, are the positives that you get from this jumping thing, do they outweigh the negatives? I mean, what does jumping actually add to the game? It's not a whole lot. I mean, there's a couple cool things here and there, but for every cool thing, there's, like, things that frustrate people or things that cause problems. I mean, look at the Thaddeus encounter in Naxxramas, both the 25, 10, and 40-man versions of the encounter. A fairly integral part of the encounter was, you start off and you're fighting these two kind of ads, and then you kill them, and then you have to jump over to the main platform. But if you don't nail that jump, you're essentially taken out of the fight for like a minute. Because you gotta like swim all the way back to the front of the room and run up to the back up to the top of the platforms and try the jump again. And I mean, that was kind of nifty, I guess, but at the same time, it was really frustrating. And I'm sure there were plenty of instances where people got, entire pulls on the boss completely screwed over because people failed at that jump. And that just feels kind of unnecessary to me. I mean, they have some cool stuff where it's like, you have to jump, if you time your jump properly, you can like dodge an earthquake ability or something like that. And that's kind of neat. But that's also not really something that really everyone can kind of benefit from, because like, not everyone is going to know when they have to actually jump. I mean, healers especially, they're not looking at the bad guys that are doing the bad things. They're focusing on healing everyone. And unless there's a very obvious like raid warning or something, they're not going to know when to jump, so they can't benefit from that at all. But that's kind of neither here nor there. So, I don't know. I mean, it's almost kind of like a wash. It's like some games benefit from it, but some games really don't. And so it kind of got me thinking, like, why did I kind of get this impression that jumping has to be there? It's almost like there's this idea that if a third-person game doesn't have like a jumping, the ability to jump, it's like a game that doesn't have that somehow feels like wrong or empty, at least at first glance. I mean, obviously, there are tons of games out there that get away with not having a jump perfectly fine. And some games it just wouldn't fit in. Like, you're not going to have a jump button in an RTS. Or like an isometric, well, I guess there's probably some games out there that have jumping, isometric jumping, but that's beside the point. But like, why is there this big stigma? Maybe not a stigma, but why is it that it feels so wrong for there to not be jumping? And my first thought when I kind of approach this subject is to look at kind of the beginning. I mean, I can't really speak to the very beginning of kind of the gaming era of, Atari and all those things. But, I mean, when I think of the beginning of gaming, I always tend to go back to the Nintendo. And, I mean, obviously Nintendo is where Mario got its roots, and Mario is kind of a big deal in the gaming world. But I kind of almost wonder if that's not quite 100% of what causes this. So, let me explain. So, my whole thought process kind of actually begins with Metroid. And the reason for that is a while ago, probably a few months at this point, it was the 25th anniversary of the original Metroid game. And I read an article, I think it was on, it might have been on Kotaku, maybe on IGN, something like that. And it was listing off a bunch of kind of unknown facts, or little-known facts, I suppose, about the Metroid series. And one of those facts pertained to Metroid, pertained to Samus's Morph Ball ability. Namely, it's the Morph Ball is, of course, her ability to roll up into a little ball and roll around and drop bombs and stuff like that. And it's become a very iconic aspect of Metroid games. It's one of Samus's, most well-known features. And I was reading this article, and it explained where the Morph Ball idea came from. So I guess originally they wanted to have Samus have the ability to crouch down and crawl around and stuff, because they do have these parts in the game where there's a half height section where you have to, you can't walk through it. But the Nintendo is a fairly limited system, both in terms of its power and what it can actually do, but also the cartridges only have so much memory. So for whatever reason, they couldn't quite get a crawling animation working. Because if you think about it, it's kind of a complicated thing to do back in the day. Not a lot of games had a actual crawling element to it. A lot of times you would have maybe a duck attack or something like that. But actually crawling, it's not really so much, because that involves having entirely separate sprite with different animations, and maybe you've got the ability to use your different items when you're crawling and stuff like that. So the Morph Ball came about as kind of a workaround to that, rather than having just a crawling animation. Samus just turns into a ball, and you just roll this ball around. That's a lot easier to do. And so, from a little decision like that, 25 years ago, the Morph Ball has turned into this big thing that's kind of one of the defining features of Metroid games. So my thought process was, if that could be the case for Metroid games, I could be completely wrong in this, but I have to kind of wonder if jumping back in the day, all things considered, jumping is a fairly easy thing to animate. You just take the character sprite and you move it up and you move it down again. Obviously there are other things to consider. I'm sure the programmers who created the original Mario had a lot of work to do to, calculating, horizontal acceleration with, how long you're pressing the forward or backward button, and vertical acceleration based on how long you're holding the button, and changing directions in midair and all that stuff. But all things considered, it's a fairly simple animation to do. And in comparison, a lot of kind of attack animations back in the NES era were either, I have a sword or something that magically appears in front of me when I press the attack button, or my character sprite is holding a gun and I can press the shoot button and little dots move out from the gun. And It's pretty simple stuff. And in comparison, I tend to think that, having a jump animation is a fairly simple thing to do, but it's also somewhat like graphically more impressive than having your sword just appear in front of you or something, because that's, pretty lame. And so, if it kind of strikes me as the same kind of, workaround as the morph ball. It's kind of the same idea of it's a clever way of making everything work, but doing it kind of with the minimal amount of effort and the minimal amount of memory consumed, I guess, or room on the cartridge, or however you want to phrase it. So, like, if the morph ball can become this definitive aspect of the Metroid series, then why can't jumping become a definitive aspect of games in general? I mean, there were a lot of games back in the day that had jumping in one form or another. I don't want to say a lot, but I mean, some games had jumping as your actual attack, and I mean, Mario is probably to this day, the biggest name in gaming ever. And, Mario is known for his jumping. So, if kind of the flagship franchise of gaming in general has jumping as a big aspect, why can't jumping be kind of the same thing? It's like, it was originally a workaround, but it became a defining feature. So is that kind of the case? Is jumping just kind of something that feels like it needs to be there just because back in the day it was something that everyone did because it was kind of an easy workaround? I don't know. I mean, that's kind of the end of my thought trail, to be honest. That I just kind of wonder. I think it's a kind of interesting thing to ponder upon. I'm probably completely wrong in my assumptions and all that, but whatever.